One. Okay, hi everyone. I'm Andrew Nolan, and today I'll be giving you a little brief rundown of my paper, The Moral Status of Passing, which is a response to Silverman's paper that we read in class, Passing as Privileged. Passing as Privileged is the practice of hiding one's marginalized identity in order to pass as a member of a less disadvantaged group. So, in Passing as Privileged by Daniel Silverman, he rejects sweeping verdicts on passing and he elects instead to criticize passing for its lack of efficacy as a strategy against oppression. And he says that a passing individual doesn't completely free themselves from oppression because their act leaves the system in place. And as such, he thinks that passing is a permissible act, given that it protects, at least to some degree, at least one marginalized person, while simultaneously he criticizes passing as an overall strategy for liberation. But he doesn't make a moral judgment, he makes an efficacy judgment. And I agree that passing can be deemed permissible as an act of self preservation, given the status and safety of oppressed persons, but I don't agree with Silverman's rejection that there is an ethical or a moral worth or a moral value attached to the act of passing itself. Um, and passing is, I agree, a flawed strategy, but this isn't only due to its lack of efficacy. I argue that it's because of its moral inadequacy. And that's due to other regarding considerations, specifically other regarding considerations in regards to other oppressed members of that subset or the group that is being persecuted. Um, and so in my paper, I argue that oppression creates, unfortunately, obligations for marginalized people in groups, for people who can pass, to others like themselves who can't pass, because the stereotypes that emerge in the social framework that oppress these people create unique obligations that only people who can pass but decide not to can defy. So these stereotypes can only be fought, or not only can be fought, they can be fought in other ways too. But when it comes to visibility as a weapon against stereotypes, this capacity is uniquely in the gift of people who are able to pass but should choose not to out of solidarity for other members of their oppressed class. And what follows in my paper is that I explain why I think passing is wrong for its inaction, even if the circumstances ultimately render it permissible. And so there's a separation between what is permissible and what is morally right. I divide my paper into 5 different sections. The first is an explanation of the 2 different kinds of passing. So there's passing as privileged, and then there's just passing in general. My paper is concerned with passing as privileged in particular, since the other kinds of passing is more or less harmless. Passing and saying, "Oh, I read a certain book," or "I know how to play a certain card game," or these kinds of, or passing as that doesn't have political consequences. This isn't necessarily something that the paper is concerned with. Passing that does have political consequences is the subject of the paper, both for Silverman and for myself. There's passing that's active, and then there's passing that's passive. Passing that's passive happens without the willfulness of the passing agent themselves. Somebody else sees a person and says, "Oh, I mistook them for, a Y instead of an X," and in the process, I passed them in a certain sense. That isn't something that I feel the person is themselves accountable for, and so that's not necessarily something that I address in the paper. I'm concerned in my paper with active passing, deliberate attempts to pass as a different kind than you are in order to attain certain privileges or avoid acts of oppression. I cover how the need for visibility creates certain unique obligations for marginalized individuals. I then go into several different examples from Silverman's own argument to explain why passing by itself, if you leave the act by itself, it constitutes an abandonment of those obligations. I then explain how right and wrong operate on different axes than permissible and impermissible, as I said before. So an act can be permissible even if it's not right. And then I anticipate and address various objections to my argument, both from Silverman and charitably, thank you, from some of you who were kind enough to read the first draft of my paper. So that's the paper. I hope it's satisfactory, and I look forward to hearing one's review of it. Thank you so very much.